Well, with just under a year until the next US presidential election, Republican hopefuls continue to face off for the party nomination. 5 candidates took to the stage in Miami for the 3rd Republican debate, but yet again, former President Donald Trump didn't bother to go. Not one to be upstaged, he instead hosted his own rally just down the road. Here's the Drum's Michael Forno.
Ahead of next year's poll, the US election machine is getting into full swing.
We're here tonight to declare that crooked Joe Biden's banana republic ends on November 5th, 2024. It ends.
Donald Trump is the clear frontrunner for the Republican Party nomination, commanding as much as 60% of the vote in some polls. Of the 5 remaining candidates looking to challenge Trump, only 2 come anywhere near close to being legitimate contenders. Hardline Florida Governor Ron DeSantis.
In Florida, I showed how it's done. 1 year ago here, we want a historic victory.
And former US Ambassador to the United Nations, Nikki Haley.
The world is on fire. It is very important that we know how to defend our freedoms and how to defeat terrorism and socialism.
The debate stage was in large part concerned with questions of foreign policy.
It is not that Israel needs America. America needs Israel. They are the tip of the spear when it comes to this Islamic terrorism.
I think the future of freedom is going to be determined in the Indo-Pacific. So my policy on China and the Chinese Communist Party is very simple. We win, they lose.
But attention also turned to the elephant in the room.
Donald Trump's a lot different guy than he was in 2016. He owes it to you to be on this stage and explain why he should get another chance.
Just half an hour down the road, it was textbook Trump.
If we don't win this election, you're not going to have a country left. I'm telling you, this country's going to hell.
With talk of the southern border, stolen elections, and the nebulous deep state.
This race is not just about beating Crooked Joe, it's about defeating the entire rotten, corrupt, and tyrannical establishment. This election will decide whether power in America belongs to them forever or whether it belongs to you.
Despite facing a raft of legal woes, there's little sign Trump's electoral fortunes have been dented.
They want to silence me because I will never let them silence you. I will never let them do it. And in the end, they're not after me, they're after you. I just happen to be standing in their way, and that's true. That's true.
Emma, let's start with you. It's interesting to contrast the conventional debate with the Trump rally, and he's almost borrowing notions of a second coming, you know? I suffer for you. I am your last chance.
That's right. You know, he's framing himself as the one thing standing between the United States and the deep state conspiracy. You know, he's saying they're coming for me, but they'll come for you next. And he's been incredibly successful at doing that. You know, even if there wasn't a huge amount of attention on his rally specifically today, he loomed so large over that debate. You know, almost every question was about why would you make a better president than Donald Trump? Or, you know, we see aspiring nominees kind of trying to out-Trump Trump and do things like talk about, well, not only would I build a border wall like Trump promised he would, you know, I'd build another one to the north. And so you see Trump's capturing, I suppose, of the Republican Party writ large. And it was a really surreal experience, you know, to sit through watching that debate and this kind of veneer of like almost policy debate and a normal election, but knowing, you know, what is kind of simmering underneath all of that made it a really kind of bizarre world that we're in, I think.
Gordon, were any of those people standing on the stage for the traditional Republican debate likely to be the Republican nominee for president?
No, they're all running to be a contingency candidate.
Normally, contingency?
The contingency is obviously that something happens to Donald Trump. One of the 91 criminal convictions takes him down. He makes a decision. You know, for all the focus on Joe Biden's age, Donald Trump's not a spring chicken either. Normally in these types of debates, they would be running to be vice president. If they're kind of a lower tier candidate, you know, collectively, the 5 left on the state don't poll as high as Donald Trump does individually. It's really the party of Donald Trump right now. They're just trying to stand out just just in case. And obviously thinking ahead, thinking to 2028, depending on what happens. But clearly a distinction between what was happening on the debate stage and those issues and what was happening just down the street in the rally with Donald Trump.
It's really important, Yvonne, not to kind of cover, I was saying before, you don't want to cover Trump like it's, you know, the House Husbands of Washington, D.C., because it's a soap opera, right? But because it has implications. But he is so emboldened now, isn't he? He's like enraged. He's like got some, far more so than I think the first iteration around. There's a real clarity about, I want to get back and I want to get even.
Yeah, I mean, it's terrifying to watch, and actually to try not to watch it, actually, because it is so scary to think that, you know, the polarisation and also the fear-mongering that happens and the misinformation and the lies and the distruth in what he says, and to really create that fear, stoke the fear in everyone in such a way, saying, you know, this is what's happening to me and it will happen to you. It's what we've seen here in this country as well, and I hope that it doesn't continue to come here in such an ugly way. But for me, the concern is that, you know, what it will continue to whip up in an ugly way will actually not be about politics. It's more about the distruths, which will create even more fear and more hatred, I feel.
And it's sort of the divisions in society too. I mean, it's a really interesting one in terms of your community. A lot of people in the First Nations community have had to deal with a profound disappointment over The Voice. And no doubt, Mr Trump, I'm not comparing the two events, please be clear, was disappointed not to win the presidency. But it's hard to imagine the leap of that didn't happen. Of your community going, well, that didn't happen. The alternative is to sit with real, well, again, I don't want to conflate the two, but how does it feel to sit with real disappointment and regret and heartache when you...
I mean, socially, you know, when you have people that are, you know, telling mistruths, and all they're doing is creating more disharmony in our social connects in our communities. And so it comes back to how do we as a community pull together to make sure that we cut through the crap, really. And that's the part I think we need to really look forward to what we can do to really weed out some of these behaviours and actually not to make it normalised, which has been really hard. When I think about the last month and what's taken place and what will continue, hopefully, not to take place into our future.
Which is interesting, because that's a great reflection on how you deal with profound disappointment, but also how you deal with polarising and divisive debates in your country, right? And that's probably an example of how not to do it. Troy, it's interesting to talk about, I want to talk about Australia in a minute, but there's a lot of commentary at the moment that Trump, you know, it's not at all beyond the realms of possibility that he could win the next presidential election. And that this presidency would be unlike his last presidency, in that he's so much more focused on what he wants to do to dismantle normal democratic safeguards. I mean, do you think that's an alarmist view or not?
Not at all. I mean, Trump is an anti-democrat. I mean, we know this. I mean, he tried to overturn an election. He tried to instigate a coup d'etat on the 6th of January 2021. We should not forget that. He's facing these 91 indictments for criminal activities through his business organisation, or criminal activities as a president. So he represents an existential threat to American republicanism, to democracy. And the fact that someone doesn't accept those norms of political conventions, such as accepting you lost an election and supporting the next guy and wishing them well, I mean, that is an anathema to Trump. So there is a huge risk for America if Trump is re-elected. Now, you can't rule it out, but I'm sceptical that he would somehow find the support to be president again. I mean, Joe Biden is not a particularly strong candidate right now. I accept that. But I'm sceptical about the polls that show Donald Trump winning. I just don't think that there are enough moderate Republicans or independents who will want to take that risk and vote for Donald Trump, given everything they saw during his presidency. I think he was an ineffective president, and presented with the big challenge of COVID, he had a very ineffective response to that. But internationally, and for Australia as well, he didn't have a coherent foreign policy. He threatened to tear up alliances and traditional relationships. He had confrontations with the United Kingdom, Australia, France, South Korea, Germany. He represented a threat to the Western political establishment, the alliance structure that we're a part of. And so this would be a big risk, not only for America in sliding away from democracy towards authoritarianism, but for the world. And I think things like AUKUS,
which is the alliance between Australia, the US and the UK, that means we get that nuclear-powered, not weapons, nuclear-powered submarines, and we embed ourselves into that alliance even more firmly.
I don't think that's anywhere near guaranteed under a Trump presidency. We've already seen a number of Republicans in Congress question it. And this is the sort of thing where Donald Trump could be briefed on it in one meeting and decide at the end of the meeting, I'm not going to do that. I mean, there's a number of people like his former National Security Advisor, John Bolton, who said that he would likely withdraw from NATO, for example.
Which is the guarantee that the US will come in and back the countries of Western Europe in any conflict with anyone, brackets, Russia, brackets.
Right, and it's impossible to think that he could have united the West to defend Ukraine like Joe Biden did.
Right.
I mean, that just wouldn't have happened under Donald Trump. So there are huge risks for America, for Australia, and for the rest of the world, I think, if Trump is re-elected. I mean, this is a dangerous and existential moment, and that's why I think in the end Americans won't take that risk.
Okay.
But you can never say never.
Yeah. Can I go to you, Emma? You've probably got a bunch of things you want to say, but I would love it for the audience if you could understand. Just decode him a little bit. When he talks about deep state, is what he's really saying, I don't like bureaucrats who want to do precisely what I want, like an autocrat. Is that what deep state means? Like, why do they say that it's a threat to democracy? Because you sort of sit here and go, like we did in 2016, yeah, but there's the courts, and yeah, there's the Congress, and yeah, there's bureaucrats who, I'm a bureaucrat, I don't know how to drag my feet, I can make something happen or make something not happen, Emma.
Look, that is kind of what he means. He's touching on his own resentment, I suppose, to what he saw as roadblocks to his agenda. But when he's deploying the term deep state, it actually means a lot more than that, and he's signalling to a very particular base of the Republican Party by kind of pointing to a conspiracy that was born like in the kind of darkest corners of the internet that says that there is a networked conspiracy of elites. It's often deeply anti-Semitic, and that this network conspiracy of elites is kind of working together to undermine, unseat the United States from its powerful position.
But see,
sometimes
Donald,
it goes.
I don't think Donald Trump believes all that. Does that just essentially mean I can use that and say, I want the Justice Department to let my enemies off the hook, and I want them to criminally prosecute people I don't like? Is that what that means?
Yeah, look, I think for Trump that is what it means, but it's almost kind of irrelevant whether he believes it or not, because he's deploying it and he's signalling to a base about it, a base that's kind of mired in this conspiracy and we know is prone to violence because of it. The so-called kind of Pizzagate scandal where that did result in real violence was born out of this and is encouraged by Donald Trump and his supporters. And it's deeply tied to that kind of white supremacist base as well that Trump takes his cues from. So again, kind of whether he believes it or not doesn't really matter. It's his actions that matter, and it's his call to that base that matters, and that has been really effective. And that's deeply tied to January 6th as well that Troy mentioned. So it's really, as much as it kind of seems like wild and crazy from here, it's legitimately dangerous because it feeds in not just to the potential, domestic ramifications of a second Trump administration, but also internationally. It's deeply tied to conspiracies around Ukraine and funding for Ukraine. So I guess the kind of fallout from this internet conspiracy around the deep state is significant, and it permeates the Republican Party. The aspiring nominees were talking about it again today, trying to out-Trump. So this is something that's moved from the internet into real life that we should be really concerned about.
Gordon?
I couldn't agree more. Beginning in 2016, Donald Trump has been smashing kind of guardrails and standards and norms. In fact, in 2018, David Brooks, who's a columnist for the New York Times, wrote an op-ed that everybody should go back and read. It was called Donald Trump is not playing the game you think he is, and it's unfortunately titled, but his central argument was that the real divide of our era is not north, south, east, west, China, US, rich, poor, but high trust versus low trust. And high trust societies, and Australia is foremost among them, rely on institutions and standards and norms and organizations that are difficult to build, right? Low trust societies are designed to smash all of those because people like Donald Trump or Vladimir Putin or Erdogan or Orban cannot thrive in a high trust society. So they want to foment distrust of government, of the media, of institutions, of laws, because they want to live in a world where only strongmen, only wolves, if you will, can foster. And you saw that in the short clip you just played with Donald Trump. He really wants to smash it. So when he means deep state, he means anything that is an institution or standard or norm that is not beholden to him. And the fact that he has had the experience of a first term, where the institutions held, but not as much as we might have wanted them to. They're much weakened, and he's much more cognizant of how to go around them. So there's already a very detailed and explicit game plan among the team in the Trump campaign about what they would do on day one to weaponize the Justice Department, to go against political enemies, to wipe out, official in the government, so standard bureaucrats who are nonpartisan and non-political, and put political things in to make sure that the entirety of the government reports to him more like a king as opposed to a president in a democratic society.
So okay, just a few quick ones. What would action on climate change look like? Biden has thrown a lot of money at this Inflation Reduction Act, tried to get people to not notice that it's action on climate change by calling it the Inflation Reduction Act. There's the Clark Kent version of the... would that all be gone? Gordon? So
I would actually be more worried about that than AUKUS. There is a planning apparatus. Again, I fully agree there's a threat to AUKUS and there's a risk to AUKUS, particularly if Trump wins and he's so fickle. But the Inflation Reduction Act, climate change transition, new energy transition, of which Australia, particularly here in Western Australia, as we're focused on critical minerals, the opportunity we have for processing rare earths, et cetera, those would all be gone in a moment. There's no question he reversed those. And as indicated earlier, just that broader system of international cooperation on climate change, on new energy, on energy transition, future batteries, supply chains, et cetera. It would be chaotic, to say the least.
Emma, do you remember, just a final question, do you remember when he came and he said, right, we're going to make all the, we want to, America first, and we're going to put all these tariffs on aluminium and steel. And remember Turnbull went over and said, no. Or maybe it was a phone call. I think the phone call might have been leaked. Is that my memory correct? I wonder how that happened. And I'm not sure that Malcolm was recording it. And we had to say, no, that's not what you want to do. And he went on the radio the other day and talked to a bloke who used to work for him and said, I reckon we just put a 10% tariff on everything. 10% tariff on everything. Everything coming into the country will put a 10%. Now, that's going to make life very much more expensive for Americans. What's it going to do to free trade in the rest of the world in countries like Australia?
Well, look, again, I think that's one of the many things that we should be concerned about if a second Trump presidency comes about, because he's talking about tariffs, he's talking about economic protectionism, all of which will have significant implications for the Australian economy and the international economy as well. But I think, in Australia in particular, we need to focus much more on that bigger picture when it comes to Trump. Troy and Gordon both mentioned AUKUS, and there's this kind of like fixation on AUKUS and what might happen to AUKUS if Trump gets in, was this scramble to get it all legislated before, and unless that happens. But I think, we should be thinking about like what next, if Trump is elected and we're facing this kind of economic chaos, climate chaos, as Gordon mentioned, what can we do in Australia? What room do we have to move in a second Trump term? And I think, in terms of AUKUS, the concern shouldn't be like whether or not AUKUS goes ahead under Trump, but what AUKUS means under Trump, what it would mean for Australia if we were beholden through AUKUS to a second Trump administration. Like, that prospect is pretty frightening.
Thanks for watching. If you'd like to keep up to date with all our latest work, sign up to our newsletter today. Delivered every fortnight, it includes behind-the-scenes updates from Richard Dennis, a cartoon from Judy Horacek, details for our upcoming events and webinars, as well as explainers and graphs, and not to mention the latest cutting-edge research and analysis from the team here on the key issues facing Australia. Head to australiainstitute.org.au and visit the newsletter section, where you can read all our previous editions and sign up to get it sent directly to your inbox.